Donkey Kong and Mario, Nintendo's original blood feud. Battling it out in the early 1980s, like Carter and Reagan, complete with hostages and an oil crisis, their rivalry launched Mario's storied, heroic career. And for good reason. Donkey Kong forced Mario to rescue his then-girlfriend from his clutches, he being a rogue gorilla who had no respect for traipsing about what's clearly a hard hat only zone. Granted, the sequel then made things ethically murky for the mustachioed mushroom chomper when, in a fit of revenge, he caged Donkey Kong and tortured him in front of his son. His son, who did nothing wrong, by the way. Dude, you won! What the f*** are you doing? So when Rare soft rebooted the Donkey Kong series in 1994, they aged up the generations so that the Kong with blood on his hands, or maybe just Pauline's eyeshadow, was now the cantankerous gaming critic Cranky Kong, while his son, or grandson, or grandson raised as a son who was still the son we all remember, never tainted with villainous deeds, took on the role as a protagonist. Some traditionalists still refuse to acknowledge the timeline shift, but the fact is, Rare and Shigeru Miyamoto's vision for this new Donkey Kong would have necessitated this. You see, the original arcade Donkey Kong was obviously aping King Kong, because it couldn't Sailor Popeye. So much that Universal sued them for it, but don't worry, they're all friends now to the tune of $1.36 billion. But the 1933 cinema classic reflected a lot of the attitudes and unconscious biases of the early 20th century, in that nature and the wild beast within were still something that needed to be tamed. And if it couldn't be tamed, then it needed to be feared. Granted, there was a healthy amount of sympathy for Kong after they shot him down and he fell to his death, and perhaps this late perspective inspired Miyamoto to view his own lady-nabbing primate in a sweeter light when devising Donkey Kong Jr. But by the 1990s, we were deep into the environmental movement, teaching a generation of kids that, hey, maybe we should be protecting endangered species, rather than shoving them off girders. We got to know Koko, a gorilla who had a vocabulary of more than 1,000 words in American Sign Language. And then there was the work of researchers like Diane Fossey, whose story was brought to life in 1988's Gorillas in the Mist, showing the world that gorillas are far gentler souls than the rumors and innuendo of a century earlier. They weren't the man-eating rage monsters that Europeans feared, a ghost story from deepest, darkest Africa. As it turns out, mountain gorillas are actually vegetarians, while the only meat that Western lowland gorillas eat are termites and ants. What's more, they live in large family groups, sometimes up to or exceeding 40 members. Quite simply, gorillas are often sweet and gentle, usually only resorting to aggression to defend the family or look cool in a rap video. And this attitude shift was perfect for Rare's generational shift, with the modern Donkey Kong taking up an apprentice by mentoring young Diddy Kong. It's here where we're reminded of DK Vine staffer Cameron Regal's theorem on the character of Donkey Kong. If the modern Donkey Kong is paired with Diddy Kong, then it's impossible for the modern Donkey Kong to be portrayed in a villainous light. Caring about Diddy's well-being and Diddy looking up to and emulating his hero makes for an effortlessly pure dynamic. Less father and son, and more Indiana Jones and Short Round. An adult dude taking a child into recklessly dangerous situations because it's awesome. And this notion held true for the entirety of the Donkey Kong Country and Land trilogies, with the only time Donkey Kong ever showed a dark side being in Donkey Kong Country 3, when K. Rool drugged him while he was on vacation and stuffed him into a cybernetic framework, turning him into the organic cerebral battery for K. Rool's robot puppet king, Chaos. Now, Donkey Kong wasn't just some potato powering a light bulb. He vividly recalled being Chaos before Dixie and Kitty abruptly yanked him out. There were probably safer ways to do that, like typing Ctrl-Alt-Delete before landing the final barrel on Chaos. What lingering impact did this have on his brain? Just make sure your brain remembers this bit. It'll be important later. And sure, both Donkey and Diddy were kind of misogynistic twerps towards Dixie that one time. But you'd only know it if you read the instruction manual. Let us know in the comments if you read the Donkey Kong Land 3 instruction manual. But generally, Donkey Kong was always presented as a laid-back beach bum with an adventurous spirit. Someone who was only spurred into action when his family was messed with. Or his things. That's why there was some worry among Donkey Kong Country fans when the Donkey Kong Country version of DK, or Super Donkey Kong, was reintegrated into Mario's orbit with Mario Kart 64, coming out in late 1996 in Japan and early to mid-1997 throughout the rest of the world. It was clear in the game's artwork that Donkey Kong was being paired with contemporary Mario villains, Bowser and Wario. And sure, there was still some familial bad blood between the Kongs and Mario clan. I don't think Donkey Kong would have just gotten over this. I know Donkey Kong fans didn't. His motivations for joining Mario Kart 64 were probably to show up Mario, to prove that the Kongs are still better than him, and that he better not be thinking of sniffing around their cities or jungles now that he's got the political protection of an entire Mushroom Kingdom. But a funny thing happened as a result of Mario Kart 64. It bonded this particular group of characters together as a nucleus that would be at the center of nearly 100 friendly competitions and athletic events over the following quarter century. The first reunion of this group happened a couple of years later in Mario Party. While this meeting was born out of an unsettled desire to see who among the Mario Kart 64 racers was the true superstar, Toad abstained, having no ego to speak of, and knowing that he would lose. It quickly became a life-sized board game battle and an existential struggle against the only Mario Kart 64 racer that was left out entirely, Bowser. Bowser was seemingly wanted by the authorities of the Mushroom Kingdom at the time as an international war criminal. Seize his yacht, I say! Wait, Daisy is the one who owns a yacht. Seize her yacht too! Eat the rich! We're carving them up tonight with guillotine!
Dum dee dum dee dee dum dee dum doo dum dee dee.
As Donkey Kong and Mario fought against Bowser's machinations, while also trying to prove that they were superior to one another, they actually began understanding each other. Not really liking each other, mind you, but forming a grudging mutual respect. It probably didn't happen all at once, and maybe it took the time they spent throughout the rest of 1999, fighting each other in the inaugural Smash, or golfing while Donkey Kong's mother was on her deathbed, for them to start becoming tentative friends. But the following year saw them, along with the other Mario partiers, found a theme park together, and then by the year after that they were having regular picnics. And sure, maybe you would invite Donkey Kong to a picnic because you think he's a lowland gorilla and he's going to gobble up all the ants, but Donkey Kong wouldn't be attending your picnics unless he actually likes you as a person. Tell yourself all you want that he's about to go Golden Corral on an anthill, but he's seen deep inside of your beautiful soul. He admires the qualities that make you, you. So it's likely that when the second Smash tournament came about, Donkey Kong and Mario were more friendly than adversarial, albeit with one eye still wearily gazing back at their contentious history. Things had even thawed to the point where Rare's handheld team were briefly considering adding Mario and cohorts to an early build of Diddy Kong Pilot, a move that would have likely taken a sledgehammer to the notion of Donkey Kong and Super Mario being separate franchises linked by a shared heritage. But someone thought better of it, and by E3 2001, this became the Redneck Kong build of Diddy Kong Pilot. It then became Banjo Pilot after Nintendo declined to purchase Rare in 2002, leading the studio to be owned by Microsoft, and Donkey Kong without the home that had given him his very heroic identity over the past 8 years. Without the creative teams at Rare to shepherd his future, what would this mean for how this Donkey Kong would be depicted going forward? As it turned out, all over the damn map. There would be multiple goes at defining Donkey Kong's post-90s legacy over the 8 years before Donkey Kong Country Returns set the current standard. Studios like Nintendo EAD, Namco, Payon, and even Rare, still making handheld remakes, would work to put their stamp, or stampers, on the still malleable mold that was this more heroic Donkey Kong. It was only inevitable then that an attempt would be made to revert Donkey Kong to the more traditional villainous persona that the world was introduced to in 1981 as an adversary to Mario, as a big, dumb ape, serving as an annoying obstacle, a brutish force of nature. The thing is, this version never exactly went away. Not really. Rewinding back to 1994, two parallel versions of Donkey Kong were actually launched the same year. Donkey Kong for the Game Boy, commonly known as Donkey Kong 94, redesigned young DK Sr. to be a closer match to what was coming later that year with Donkey Kong Country. And from there, this version of DK Sr. and Jr. would still show up whenever arcade iterations of the characters needed to be used, usually in smaller budget games, like the Game & Watch series. By doing it this way, Nintendo could have their banana cream pie and eat it too. They could still play around with the original conceit of Donkey Kong from the 1980s, but it wouldn't bog down the clear vision Rare had for Donkey Kong's present, which had breathed new life into the Super NES, and even laid the groundwork for Rare's own shared universe that would define the Nintendo 64 as much as Mario, Zelda, or Pokemon. Hell, the more popular Rare version of Donkey Kong being added to Mario Kart 64 was a relatively late call made by Nintendo to capitalize on the red-hot success of the series. But even with that crossover, the DK94 versions would continue to appear up to 2002, when Game & Watch Gallery 4 came out a mere month after the Rare buyout, but not before they slightly tweaked the title screen to acknowledge the turning of the page. After this game, there would be only one active version of Donkey Kong from that point forward. Cranky Kong's villainous youth was truly retired. This meant that the planned sequel to Donkey Kong 94, announced at E3 2002, Donkey Kong Plus, would therefore use the Rare version of DK. It then evolved into the game we all know,
Mario vs. Donkey Kong.
Nintendo's newfound focus on brand consistency with their Donkey Kong models was held as more important than character consistency, with little regard to how using the Rare version of Donkey Kong would rip a hole in the carefully developed relationship between Mario and DK. And worse, maybe even force fans to take sides, or start viewing the erstwhile 90s hero of the jungle as a baddie forevermore. But thankfully, this didn't really happen. The Donkey Kong Country remakes developed by Rare turned out to be the most profitable path for Donkey Kong during this tumultuous time, directly leading to Donkey Kong Country Returns and the current status quo. And while Mario vs. Donkey Kong did become a long-running sub-series of the Mario franchise, with Donkey Kong usually serving as the titular foe, each Mario vs. Donkey Kong game typically ends with renewed peace between Plumber and Primate. And most of the plot seemed to be the equivalent of Donkey Kong saying, "Just a prank, bro." But how do we explain the first entry in the series? Currently the talk of the town with a big Switch remake. After all, isn't Donkey Kong wildly out of character here, becoming an irrational addict for the mini Mario toys? Sure, Donkey Kong has traditionally gone to great lengths to get what he wants, but that usually means bananas or toppling tyranny. Why would he want this? Of all things, this! In Mario vs. Donkey Kong, he desperately lusts after these mini Mario figurines, of which there's artificial scarcity to create further demand, seemingly losing all semblance of his morality in the process, to the point where he's abducting toads, precariously climbing tall buildings to fight Mario to the death, and even operating a killbot. A killbot! This isn't Donkey Kong. Not by any stretch. And then it wouldn't even be Lanky Kong. This just isn't my laid-back beach dude who loves his little homies. This is a guy in the midst of a breakdown. Someone who's going scorched earth and doubling down because he had something of a public fit and is too proud to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. That was a bit much. I'll try to do better." But, did I say Killbot? Remember when I said to remember chaos? Yes. Donkey Kong's brain had been overwritten more than 7 years before the events of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, when he was used as the fleshy power source for chaos. And while DK and Diddy were unplugged, those memories of being, and I quote, a power-crazed madman would undoubtedly remain. And if he never saw anyone about this, never got the help that he truly needed, never got those dark impulses imprinted by Chaos's software under control, then all he would need would be a trigger. Something to activate him, like a hairy, firm-assed Manchurian candidate, taking the noble and big-hearted Donkey Kong we all know and love and turning him into this. And I believe this is exactly what the opening of Mario vs. Donkey Kong depicts. The game begins with Donkey Kong relaxing in a house that seems to be located not in the Congo jungle or Donkey Kong Island, but somewhere within the Mushroom Kingdom. It would make sense that there would be a permanent Kong timeshare in the Mushroom Kingdom, one perhaps even provided to him by Mario or the Mushroom Kingdom's royal family. By 2004, he had been staying in the Mushroom Kingdom quite a bit, and he was beginning to bring the likes of Diddy with him, a Kong refuge for those long trips away to Mario Kart or Party. It looks like he even brought some of the Banana Horde with him on this trip. And as DK lazily channel surfed Mushroom Kingdom TV, delighting in all of the weird local commercials and brands he had never seen before, he stumbled upon the ad for the nascent Mario Toy Company and its product, the Mini Mario. Now watch. Do you see that? That's right. Thanks to the subliminal messaging in the advertisement and Donkey Kong's already tampered with brain, DK was reprogrammed to become a zealot for the mini Mario figures, explaining away his criminal actions as a result of the unscrupulous marketing firm hired by the Mario Toy Company. DK did come to his senses by the end of the game, and while he was gifted a mini Mario figure of his own by Mario that helped quell the hunger inside of his mind, the pain of this experience, and more importantly the shame that he felt, wouldn't leave him overnight. His next appearance in the timeline was in Mario Golf Advance Tour, and you tell me if the guy was going through something here. He can barely speak. A classic symptom of depression. By the time of Donkey Kong Country Returns, DK had rebounded from this long, dark night of the soul, but the effects it had on him were still apparent. He would never be completely free from what this commercial did to him. I think if we're to take every Donkey Kong appearance as part of one long narrative in the life of the man, then him getting yanked out of Chaos's operating system left him susceptible to this commercial like none other. The brainwashing that went on there would then be ever present in Donkey Kong's mind, something that's always trying to drive his decision making, and something he would always have to push aside to do the right thing. But that's also why when Kalimba, a priest in the Tiki Tak tribe, tried to hypnotize him, it had this effect. None. Donkey Kong could not be hypnotized, because Donkey Kong already had a master, and that master is the Mario Toy Company. So despite the years of bitter feuding, of abductions and abuse, it was ultimately Mario that helped save the day when the Tiki Tak tribe returned. Without his pre-existing dark side imprinted on his brain, the repeated bongo drum beats in his head telling him to ransack mini Mario figures, Donkey Kong might have fallen under the sway of Kalimba, and Tiki Tong would have lorded over Donkey Kong Island as its undisputed god once more. And if we thank Mario, then I suppose we should also thank K. Rool for being the first to mess around with his gray matter and making it possible for DK to be programmed in the first place. In the end, the unethical actions of Donkey Kong's villains only helped make him into a more inspiring hero. And doesn't that make the villains the true heroes? And so if Nintendo sometimes says that Donkey Kong is a villain because he sometimes fights Mario, then just remember that villains are heroes. And that includes Donkey Kong. Plus, if Mario did this to my dad, I'd fight him too. Dude, you won! What the f*** are you doing?